Hello and welcome back to another episode of a Physiology of Endurance Running podcasts. I'm Dan, joined as ever by Owain. Owain, how are you doing?
Yeah, not bad. Not bad. Yeah, how are you doing?
Yeah, good. My knee's making progress, which is nice. Back running every day, which I like. Seems to be trending better quite rapidly. No
Uh,
regrets about putting out of London.
It was,
I keep posting on my Strava. Oh, so it's on then. It's like
yeah.
back on. No, it's not back on.
I
It's
think your
still.
first run you had someone ask, is London back on?
Yeah, no, it's not on, I'm afraid. But I feel like, yeah, knee feels pretty good now. Pretty much fine with the running I've done. I've not done any crazy fast yet, but feeling like it's getting there, which is nice. And yeah, tolerating an increase in running volume and some slowly getting heavy intensity too. So that's made me very happy. But no London. I'm healthy but not fit.
Yeah,
Uh, and I'm not going to rush it. I'm going to take my time and build back slowly.
yeah. Be watching on TV.
Yeah, yeah. How's 100K training?
Good. Yeah, I think well, timely episode for me. Probably starting. I wouldn't say the taper. I think we'll come to this when we talk about practical applications. It's not a taper, but hit the peak, I think. Yeah. So
Peak
starting to
mileage. Yeah.
starting to bring the training down. Yeah, yeah, should be
Nice.
right. Yeah.
Should we dig into our sponsors then?
Yep. Yeah. They've sponsored by Saw again, as always. They've kindly sent me some socks for the 100K, which is really appreciated. It will offset the heavy Wales vest. Um, um,
Yeah, lighter socks.
yeah. We mentioned last time, but we'll just go through again. So we'll have a bunch of events on for London in the build up to the marathons. They start on Thursday, which I think the main thing it's on their Instagram. So if you should have already checked out Saw on Instagram because it all looks really, really cool kit. But yeah, on the Thursday they're doing an event with unsanctioned athletics. It's called the One for the Local Street Race. In the evening, and then a party in the evening as well. And then on Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, the Saw HQ is open, which I imagine is pretty cool to go to. I think we need to visit at some point.
We do need to make a trip to Mecca, don't we?
Yeah. But yeah, so during the day on Thursday it will be open as well. On the day on Friday, the HQ is open. And then on Saturday, at 9:30 in the morning, they've got a shakeout run with Ben is running. And then across all of the days as well, they're going to have coffee provided by Local Knowledge Coffee, who I think we can say are friends of the podcast because one of the founders, Tom, is a member of Le Croupes. I'm really looking forward to trying that coffee as well. He's started a coffee, we call it coffee roastery with his brother. And yeah, they're working with Saw, which is really
We're
cool.
giving out free shout outs now. Free shout outs to
I'm in it for the coffee.
right. He's just trying to get in with me, get favors here.
No, it's cool. It's also a small world. But yeah, no, it should be cool events around London Marathon. Kind of cool because obviously on the day it's obviously the big thing, but it's kind of cool to make it a weekend of activities, isn't it?
Yeah.
Although for you, you'd
you're
just
racing,
be locked up in the elite
Wow,
hotel.
I was just gonna say if you're racing, don't walk around London all day Saturday, go into the expo and go into Saw and just go to Saw and skip the expo. You don't need to go to the expo.
25,000 steps the day before the marathon.
Oh, and the rest, yeah.
Yeah.
Nice. So today we're gonna talk, hopefully appropriately, about tapering. So we're mid taper. Maybe we should have released, if you're running London's, maybe we've released this a couple of weeks ago, but better late than never. And very appropriate for Owain at the minute. And this, we're always going to it's always gonna be relevant. You're always gonna be tapering into some race or another.
So sorry if you did Newport at the weekend. We're a bit late.
Yeah, sorry, missed that one. Yeah. But as I said, better late than never. We're gonna do a deep dive into what the research says, what our takeaways are, like how to apply the evidence to your own taper. So do you want to kick us off, Owain?
Yeah, I think we have a plan about where we're going to go with this, but I think first of all let's define what a taper is. I should have put that at the top, but I think there's a nice quote from one of the bits of research that we'll cite and one of the authors, Inigo Mujica, I think I pronounced that right. He's involved in loads of the research. So if you want to look up any research about this, just look up his name. But yeah, they define, or they say that the taper is a reduction in the training load of athletes in the final days before important competition with the aim of optimizing performance. And this reduction of the training load can be achieved through the alteration of several components, including the training volume, intensity, frequency, as well as the pattern of the taper and its duration. So yeah, there's a few sort of levers you can pull with a taper, but it's reducing training to optimize performance.
Yeah, basically, yeah. And it's just which lever should we pull? I think that's a key question of the taper. Like, in terms of actually training can be really complicated, but you can break it down to 3 variables, can't you? The duration of training you're doing, the intensity of training you're doing, and actually the frequency, how often you're doing it. And that's, there's obviously infinite ways you can structure that, but that's the nuts and bolts of it. And actually, I think the research is reasonably clear and concise on taper, which is the taper on optimizing the taper, which is nice, because often it's a bit messy.
Yeah, I feel like that's maybe been a theme of a few of the last episodes, that actually there isn't much, and you just have to. I mean, that's sort of that was probably one of the main takeaways from doing a master's, is actually being a sports scientist is as much about filling in gaps and making, educated and some evidence-based guesses, but they're guesses or estimations. But no, yeah, like you say, with the taper, it's a lot more clear. Probably still, it's still not. There's still not a one size fits all taper.
Yeah, and I think it's still going to alter. There's still going to be individual variation in how you should approach a taper, and it is probably going to depend a little bit upon the event you're doing and just your own psyche as well as your own physiology. But yeah, I think there are some reasonably clear cut rules which we'll get into. We'll stop throwing out spoilers now and actually get into some content, shall we?
Yeah. So I think having done the research, or some of the research, I've not done a exhaustive literature review on this, but I think what I thought was a good way to start is there is research on what happens if you completely stop training, and often it's by similar authors, and I think their reasoning for it is quite good and fits in with this podcast and hopefully giving people some more information. And what they talk about in their introduction is that when you research a taper, as we just said, there's loads of variables in it. The training age of the athlete, their age, their gender, the event they're training for. That can vary the starting point of the research and then where it ends up. Whereas if you just completely stop training, the stimulus that you're controlling is set, like you stopped, and then you can see what changes over. There's a couple of papers, 2 to 4 weeks, and then 4 weeks onwards. And if that's the sort of floor of what's going to happen, then hopefully it maybe clears up for some people. Like, yeah, if you taper, that isn't going to happen. So it's quite a nice starting point, I think.
Yeah. So basically, you've been training, take away the stimulus completely. They do no training. What happens across a range of different time frames? Yeah. Should we dig into that then?
Yeah. And maybe also worth saying, although we've just said it's a controlled stimulus, you can go even further and do bed rest, which sometimes gets done in studies, but that's like really extreme.
Yeah, but that's also not real world, is it? We don't go right. Say for example, I think this is also interesting, taking like through the lens of like you've been sick, you've been ill, you haven't been able to train, but maybe then you're a bit more in bed, but even then you're normally walking around a little bit, bearing your own body weight. It's not completely like you are. Some of these studies, they do complete bed rest for like days on end, don't they? Which sounds horrendous. I wouldn't be paid to do any of those studies.
Yeah. So again, these papers are both of them actually are by Inigo Mujica. So short-term cessation of training, which they say is sort of 2 to 4 weeks of just completely stopping training. There's a small loss in VO2 max. From memory, it's about 2 to 4%, which isn't a very big loss in VO2 max. And they sort of suggest that is mainly central reductions, because you have a drop in plasma volume and therefore a drop in blood volume after a couple of days. So that then drives a drop in VO2 max, but that's, up to 4 weeks later, you're only having a few percent drop. Plasma volume drops, and then that also changes stroke volume and cardiac output. Cardiac output also drops after sort of 12 to 21 days. At a sort of muscular level, this one of the sort of nuances they talk about is that with some of these studies, you'll have people, quite often they'll do a training intervention and then the cessation, and you get 2 studies out of one group of people. But you have to sort of pick apart whether someone has just started training for that study, 8 weeks before, and then has stopped, or if they, like us and like probably a lot of the listeners to this, have been training for years, and then there is going to be a difference. And one of the things they noted was if you've been training for a long time, you don't really see a reduction in like mitochondrial sort of function and density. That sort of remains fairly unchanged. And then muscular power also seems to sort of stay fairly stable, like it actually increases and then stays fairly stable over those sort of 2 to 4 weeks. So sort of saying that, like you if you said to someone like you need to stop training for a month, you'd probably think like, real panic stations, right? Like you'd be, oh God, like I'm not going to be able to run when I start running again. But actually it's not that big a change, which also maybe speaks to the fact that you can feel quite small changes. And maybe argue like
you are going to feel pretty rubbish if you didn't run for a month and then started running. But actually it's probably, I reckon a lot of it is the economy and just the perception of effort, and actually just changes to the ligaments, tendons, etc., that are going to affect like your movement patterns. But actually physiologically, a lot of it, like you said, probably hasn't changed all that much.
Yeah. And then there's sort of 2-part papers. So the second one was long-term cessation, so over 4 weeks. And at that point, you start to see VO2 max dropping off a bit more. More blood volume decreases, which that's sort of central change to VO2 max. And then that's where you really start to see the differences based on training status, they noted. So people that are well trained, they don't really have the biggest sort of drop off. It's hard to sort of track, like there's not much data on like what happens if you take someone that's been training for 5 years and get them to stop for 3 months versus 6 months sort of thing. But there's less drop off the longer you've been training, which again I think you sort of see anecdotally. You hear about people that train like really high level as juniors and then take a few years off and then come back and they're training, or they improve ridiculously quick. You see anecdotally. And you start to also see things like a reduction in the capillarization of muscle fibers. There wasn't really a change in muscle fiber makeup or type, which you'd maybe expect to see. You'd maybe expect like maybe a bit of a shift towards the sort of type 2 X fibers, which are the really, really fast twitch ones. But they didn't note that drastic a change to those. But this is sort of, it's just long term. So how long's a piece of string sort of thing. Like I'm sure if you looked at someone 5 years after they stopped training, you would see that change. Whereas 6 weeks after, you probably wouldn't.
Yeah. And we were having a bit of a chat about this before, weren't we? Like things that are structural, like the size of your heart, like your left ventricle, which is the chamber that's going to pump blood out to your systemic circulation to your muscles and your organs, etc. Actually, they take a long time to build. Anything structurally, changing the size of your left ventricle, increasing the thickness of your heart, making that ventricle bigger, that takes quite a lot of time to do. But it's also going to take a lot of time to undo, like for structural changes to occur, because it's unlike things that are a bit smaller, like enzymes are very easy to create, and also the turnover is quite high depending on which enzyme you're talking about, and that is going to be linked more to like mitochondrial function, etc. I imagine that but if you've been training for years and years and years, your VO2 max is going to take a very long time to reach the same level as someone who's sedentary and never done any training. It might never, if you've been doing it for 30 years, it might never ever get back to the sort of VO2 max scores and cardiac outputs you'd expect when you are compared to someone who's never ever trained.
Yeah, and I think you see that in the sort of some of the longevity work that's being published, where I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, but having such a higher VO2 max means far better sort of quality of living or quality of life, like as you age. And the same with like strength. I think it's like hat grip strength is the sort of one that gets bandied about as a marker of sort of like longevity and how well you're going to age. So if you were fit when you were younger and you have a better quality of life when you're older, then obviously something's going on between them to suggest that maybe some of the adaptations are sticking about or having some sort of impact even in late life. So yeah, like you say, it takes a long time to undo. Coming back to sort of acute training, like we said, you'd feel rubbish after a month off, but
actually,
the changes aren't drastic.
The changes aren't that drastic, and it wouldn't take you long to be back to your previous fitness, because a lot of these adaptations that you've lost are things that reverse very quickly, like that drop in plasma volume that you talked about. Well, we can increase plasma volume really quickly, right? Because actually, you're not building new structures, you're not building new hearts, you're just retaining more liquid in your blood. Which is very easy to do, right? Just some sigging in the kidney and a couple of days and you're off again. So although it'll feel bad initially, you're going to be back to normal pretty quickly. And I guess the whole point of why we started with this is you're not going to lose all your fitness by the taper. Like, take confidence in that if you keep training, even at reduced load, you're still going to maintain those adaptations really nicely.
Yeah. So let's talk about some of the taper research. Like we said with the defining the taper, you're aiming to optimize performance and sort of use those levers with changing training load. Looking at some of the data where tapers have been done by a group of participants and some of the changes they see. I think one that stands out across the body of research is fairly quickly you get an increase in muscular strength and power with just a sort of couple of days of reduced training load. So the sort of implication of what's going on there is that just reducing the training load restores some physiological capacity that's potentially being impaired through sort of longer term training. So the fatigue and adaptation model that is used both in endurance sports and in strength and power sports. I guess it's called sort of I can't remember that. Is it overcompensation or supercompensation? That's it.
Yeah.
So you reduce the training load and you reduce that fatigue response and actually restore the capacity of in this case your working muscles, and you just get that strength and power back, which is going to potentially impact your performance.
And I think there's two parts, aren't there? It's getting rid of the fatigue, so actually you're not fatigued, and so you're returning to where you should be. But also, I guess that is like, that's not a super compensation. That is just recovering. And then the idea that actually, if we give someone enough fatigue, reduce the fatigue enough that maintain the stimulus needed to maintain adaptations, if you actually do super compensate and get to a fitness where you haven't been before, probably because you are freeing up some energy for adaptation to fully take place. Because I think there's always going to be a compromise between actually doing enough training. Like, the more training you do, the bigger of a stimulus you're getting, but then you may well be impairing some of that recovery as well, which is going to fully mean that you get a full adaptation response to every training session. And if that goes too far the wrong way, that's when you become overtrained and ill and fatigued and etc. So I think there's probably two parts to it, which is just getting rid of fatigue, returning to baseline, but then allowing the body to really super compensate to all that training load is done and really lead to improved physiology come race day.
Yeah. And one of the sort of other, I guess, theories behind why you get that increase in strength and power is that you generally see an increase in muscle glycogen content as well, which, especially when we're talking about marathons, is really important. But again, if you're training every day, or if you're training twice a day, you're constantly sort of fighting that depleted state, aren't you? You're constantly having to work to fuel. And a lot of this research will have been done in cyclists and swimmers as well, that are potentially, training even more and even more sort of acutely aware of maintaining muscle glycogen levels. So yeah, just reducing even some of the training load sort of allows that increase in muscle glycogen. And then if we're talking about London Marathon in a few weeks, then you're also going to be adding in things like a carb load as well, which is going to further enhance that aspect.
With the strength and power stuff, I imagine, there definitely is going to be some central nervous system fatigue when you're in the depths of a big training block, and reduction in neurotransmitters and also probably response at the muscle level as well, meaning you need to send a bigger stimulus down your nerves, your neurons, to get to your muscle to achieve the same level of activation. And if we give appropriate recovery, then you have the opposite. So you don't need as much of a central drive within the brain to send a signal to your muscle to run at 4-minute Ks, for example. And I think that ties in pretty well to what you see if the taper's gone well, is that actually speeds feel just easier, don't they? Like on race day, at Valencia, for example, like I averaged 309 a K, and 309 a K has never felt so easy. Especially the first, half, isn't it? It just feels, I think, when the taper goes well, paces that normally feel super hard just feel effortless. That's the sign that's the dream, isn't it? That's the sign that you've nailed everything, and the training block and the taper, and you're just feeling great come race day.
Yeah. And then I guess an interesting sort of discussion point that runs across a few different bits of research is that actually potentially get a little bit of an increase in blood volume, and which maybe seems counterintuitive in terms of, like, we mentioned if you completely cease training, quite quickly you have a drop in plasma volume. But one of the suggestions, which is especially relevant for running, is that when you are running, you encounter something called hemolysis, which is effectively destruction or you're destroying red blood cells because of the contact you're making with the ground every step. So the suggestion, and this is from a few systemic reviews that have found this, and one piece of sort of primary research that I'd read. The suggestion was that you reduce the amount of hemolysis that's going on, and you get that sort of little increase in blood volume, especially those last couple of days before a race, where the 2 or 3 days before a marathon, where normally you might run 40, 50k, and you only run like 10 to 15. That's quite, if you just think about the amount fewer footsteps you're taking across those days, especially if you don't spend the day in the expo the day before the marathon, you're going to get a bit of an increase in blood volume.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just this idea, isn't it, that when every foot strike you take, you're compressing those capillaries in your foot, the small blood vessels, and crushing red blood cells. And obviously, if you're doing lots of training, then the net is going to be an increase in red blood cells, you hope, if you're getting a good response, a good stimulus. But actually, you're not going to chronically be losing red blood cells, because you're also going to be making new red blood cells at a greater rate. But if you can get rid of that if you can tip the equation towards more creation than destruction, then yeah, I guess that's the principle, isn't it? That you're going to get a bigger increase in your hemoglobin mass, and that pretty much directly translates into an increase in VO2 max.
Yeah, yeah. I think maybe the last couple of little bits of research that I'd read that I think are worth talking about. There's one paper by Smith and Lawler, and this is maybe less primary sort of physiology research, and they took a pretty big data set of activities from Strava. They took 158,000 activities and looked at what sort of tapers recreational runners are doing, and then went some way to sort of define the tapers and then look at the effect of performance. They did things like comparing marathon performance to the person's 10k best, to see if the taper basically worked. And well, the first sort of interesting thing they said was that in their data set, they said that 2/3 of runners, started a taper, and they looked up to 4 weeks out, started to reduce their volume, but then increased the volume again within 4 weeks. So they sort of called that a relaxed taper. Obviously, if you're running 20k a week, then it might be that it's quite easy to then run 25k a week.
I think what it is it's panic training, isn't it? It's panic training.
Panic training
you've started to get a bit tired in your marathon block, and then actually you realize your event is coming up, so you put in a second wind and really get increase your training a bit to try and get a last bit of fitness come race day. Especially if you're thinking about 158,000 activities, a lot of these people are going to be pretty low level runners, aren't they? Just by definition, they're not going to be elite, are they? Because you've got so many athletes.
Yeah, and I think they actually took out elite. I don't know if they put a performance limit on. I can't remember, but I think it did note it was recreational runners. So I'd assume you would want to define, or you would want to separate recreational and elite, in my mind at least. But their finding with this huge data set was that the best taper was sort of a 3 to 4 week, and what they called a strict taper, so where every week you actually did reduce volume, you didn't then have a bigger week within that. But they also said they're pretty rarely utilized, and their thinking around it was, if you're disciplined enough to do a 4 week strict taper, then you're probably also more likely to pace the race well. Whereas if you chuck in like your biggest week 2 weeks out from a marathon, then it maybe suggests being more predisposed to also having a positive split in the race. So yeah, I thought it was an interesting use of sort of big data, but it's maybe one of those ones where you have to then do some digging and some caveating. But yeah, interesting that 2/3 of runners didn't really taper. So yeah, maybe there's a bigger.
Well, I do think a big part of it is, like you said, if you are only running 3 or 4 times a week and not covering that much distance, how much recovery do you need? You're probably actually not overloading your body that much, are you?
Yeah.
Whereas if you're doing exceptionally high volumes of training, then you probably are going to have to drop it down a bit more, just because even if you're conditioned to that level of training, the accumulated fatigue is going to be much, much higher. And I reckon there's also something in that, if you're doing a high volume of training, then you are obviously more invested in the performance. And so you probably are pushing closer to how much training your body can actually handle. And so you're going to need more rest to get rid of that fatigue, basically, compared to someone who's just training 4 times a week and probably isn't pushing himself all that hard. So I think that definitely needs to be taken into account as well, isn't it?
Yeah. And then one last paper, because it's a pretty recent systematic review. And again, they were looking at trying to sort of look at what the current evidence base says for the best application of tapers. So their findings with I think it ended up being like about 10 studies made the cut of their systematic review. And they found that you need to taper more than 7 days. which makes sense. You wouldn't start your taper a week out for a marathon. And they said maintaining frequency and intensity was important, which I think we'll come on to in a minute. And they also noted that in studies where the intensity was reduced, there wasn't actually an increase in performance. And then when they look at effect sizes, which is one of the one way of statistically analyzing sort of the effect of research and the impact of an intervention, they sort of suggested that 8 to 14 days seemed to be the best way of increasing performance. They didn't specify the event, and chances are it's not going to be marathons that's being researched with tapers. It's going to be like a 5K or a time to exhaustion trial. So yeah, maybe you want to be on the higher end of that 8 to 14 days when you're tapering for a marathon. But yeah, I think that sort of leads nicely to maybe some more practical applications of the research. Yeah, and how we would maybe then think about applying that to especially marathons, right? Like it's going to be a bit different with 5Ks and halves, but
yeah, I mean, I was going to add that in. Like, is it different? Like, people think taper and they think marathon, and that's because a marathon is a big A goal, isn't it? And they want to run their best on race day, and they're really concentrating on that one big effort, that one big. They want to run, they want to run a PB, and they've invested weeks, a 20-week block or whatever, 18-week block, 12-week block into running the best they can on race day. But I think a taper, if it's going to improve your VO2 max and lead to improvements in time to exhaustion in the research and stuff, it's going to improve performance over any distance. Like, and like the physiological demands of a marathon are actually not all that different to racing a 5K and then a 10K. If you can get your VO2 max higher, that's going to result in improved performance over all distances. And I mean, an example for me was tapering into Barcelona half. I decided that I was going to properly do a 2-week taper period, and resulted in a big PB for me. I was like, I was still a little disappointed with my time, but I do think that doing the taper is going to be beneficial for everything. But people don't associate it with other distances because it's always, a summer of 5K racing, or you can race at 10K much more frequently, can't you?
I guess like you say, a marathon is normally a big goal and a lot is invested in it, isn't it? So makes it easier to taper. I guess maybe there's a chance that people are going to be slightly varying their training to different distances. I think we've probably said before, we don't think it needs to vary that much, but you're maybe the fatigue is going to be coming from the intensity if you're training for a 5K, rightly or wrongly, versus like a long run. No, I think, like you say, I think all of this can apply to every distance.
I guess the other thing is that actually you also can't taper into every race if you're going to race 10 times over the summer, because you'd never actually do any training. So it's picking your goal and going, right, for this one I'm probably going to taper into it and stuff. But let's get into some practical recommendations, shall we?
I think where I'd like to start is, we sort of referred to it when you asked about how my training's going, is I think, at least personally, I think it's worth differentiating between where you would maybe have like a peak week in terms of mileage, or in terms of mileage or time, or training load that might happen sort of 4 to 5 weeks away from a goal, and then the training slightly reduces after that, but I wouldn't necessarily call that a taper. So maybe quite a common thing with people doing marathons is a 20-mile plus run. I referred to it on the last podcast. I saw some beyond 20-mile runs, and some, I think I saw a few like 3.5+ hour runs. That's probably
hell of a run, isn't it?
Yeah,
3.5 hours.
That's maybe a topic for the Q&A we'll do in a few weeks. But that isn't going to come, well, probably isn't going to happen, 2 to 3 weeks out from a race. That might be more like 4 to 5 weeks out from a marathon. And it might be then the next week your training load is slightly reduced, but it's not like you haven't taken your foot necessarily like off the gas. So I think it is there is maybe a differentiation between your peak week and when you sort of start to be like, okay, like taper's coming up in a few weeks, like I'm not going to run another 2.5 hour long run on the weekend, so your training volume is going to be slightly less anyway, versus like actively starting a taper.
And it goes back to that periodization performance planning piece, doesn't it? In that actually it's where do you direct your energies? Like if you're going to in the last few weeks of a marathon block, actually the most important sessions are going to be those marathon specific sessions. And in that case, well, maybe you do need to reduce the volume a little bit to freshen up so you can actually execute those sessions properly. And yeah, obviously the mileage is really, really important. And I'm never going to say that it isn't, because we're both big believers in mileage, but actually those adaptations are much slower to come about. So maybe it's a case of, right, 4 weeks out, 5 weeks out, it's time to not like cut your losses a bit and just either hold your mileage steady or just reduce it a little bit to give you more energy available for those big specific sessions.
Yeah.
But it's not a taper necessarily, because you're still doing low, although the volume might come down a bit, you're still probably stressing your body just as much, or if not more, than you were early in the block.
Yeah. I think if you viewed it through the lens of some of the sort of training load metrics, then that number might still be the same at the end of the week, but the duration and length or distance you've run for the week is going to be a little bit less. So if you just look at it on like your Strava graph, it looks like you're starting to taper, but actually the training load and the sort of impulse is still there. So I think that's important to sort of differentiate, because I think, like at least to me, a taper is, although you can approach it fairly relaxed, I think, if you feel like you know what you're doing, it is still a quite intentional thing. Like to me at least, it is quite intentional when it's like, okay, like I'm not doing a 60-minute easy run today, it's 50 minutes. That then becomes, you are actively really thinking about every single run of the week. And
I think we've sort of said that already, that you're probably looking at those 8 to 14 day period, aren't you? And I mean, that's what I typically do, is 14 days. And actually, by going back, we've already said already, the research pretty much says maintain the frequency of running, and maintain the intensity, but reduce the volume. And I think that's how I go about it, is right. You all know probably that my running week is pretty repetitive. I'm going to do a standard easy day is going to be 70 minutes in the morning and 40 minutes in the evening. Well, I'm going to keep doubling, but I'm going to start in that first week of a taper, I might just reduce it to 60 minutes and 30 minutes. And as you get closer to the race, then you're going to reduce the volume even more. So you might go, right, okay, now I'm going to do 40 minutes and 20 minutes. And actually just maintaining that frequency seems to be important for maintaining the adaptations. But I think also psychologically, if you're used to getting out and training twice a day, it's actually quite nice to keep training twice a day. And actually, if you take some of that away, your whole daily rhythm, weekly rhythm routine is completely lost, and you can end up, I think that's where you end up getting those taper tantrums, paranoia. I'm feeling awful, and if you suddenly reduce the stimulus too much, I do think you can start to feel a bit flat and a bit heavy and a bit lethargic.
Yeah. And on that point about reducing the stimulus too much, there is some sort of defined different types of tapers, although like the way they're sort of shown, well, I think it's defined, but actually in reality, like it doesn't quite look like this. But there's a couple like linear and then exponential tapers, and they're then broken down into slow and fast decay. But I think this is maybe where actually you have a plan at the start of a marathon block, if we're using that example, but you need to maybe see how you get to 14 I'm going to say 15 days out, because I think your long run 2 weeks out should probably be reduced. I don't know. I don't know about you, but I think,
Yeah, that's something that I've actually changed. I used to go and probably have the hardest session of the block 2 weeks out, thinking, right, this is the last one, get as much out as I can now, and then start the taper. Whereas I think I've moved towards, like you said, moving the last big session to like 3 weeks out, and I'm still training that whole week, but I'm not doing anything crazy. I'm not trying to really knock stuff out of the park and do the biggest, hardest, whatever long run I'm going to do in that cycle, because I do think it's just a bit risky, isn't it? And actually, are you still going to carry that fatigue into your taper? And that's when you start seeing this exponential taper it's more easy to understand seeing the graphic, but it's basically the idea that you actually drop training off very quickly, and then as you get closer to race day, it sort of stabilizes a bit. So that's, I think, where you need to put that big approach in to go, right, I hear people talk about like starting with taper with a rest day despite never having rest days, and that's that sort of exponential approach, isn't it, where you go, right, I'm suddenly going to do some training loads to quickly freshen up after really getting myself in a bit of a hole. Whereas if you're a bit more controlled with the dosing of the training, I mean, I personally take a more linear approach where I just keep knocking off a little bit of volume on every run during the final 2 weeks of the program. And I think it's more predictable in that, like you said, you know what the purpose of each run, your body's not going to have a sudden shock to go, oh, I've gone from doing all this training to having a day off, and then start panicking because your legs feel pretty rubbish the next day. And it's just, I think, just less predictable how your body's going to respond if you are having drastic changes in your training load. So that's why I favor sort of more controls, just gradually just knock a few minutes off each run. And then actually suddenly the Friday, Saturday before, you feel like, oh my God, this is so easy. I'm flying along. And the effort is so low for the pace.
Yeah, and that's a good point as well, and worth bearing in mind. Like you're not tapering to feel good the Tuesday before the race. You are aiming for it to feel good on the start line. So you don't have to. It's not like you have to freshen up and at some point in the week before the race feel good to go. There is a bit of having faith in what you're doing as well.
And I think that's where the over tapering comes from. You start panicking, but actually 10 days out, you still feel really tired, and a week out, you still feel really tired. But actually, it doesn't matter if you feel really tired a week out. As long as you've already been reducing the training a little bit, you're going to feel, like you said, you want to feel good on the Sunday, right? If you're racing a marathon, you don't care how you feel on the Wednesday, for example. And that's what I've typically found is the Thursday, Friday, Saturday, everything starts to click. That's when I start to feel good.
Yeah, and I think also there's going to be a sort of psychophysiological component as well, where week of the race, that's, even the most laid back people, you're probably going to be thinking about the race at that point. And you're going to started to see like the weather forecast and all of the sort of additional things around a race that's going to play a part as well. So you might actually be doing pretty well, but you're just a bit sort of mentally sort of highly strung and not realizing that you're actually starting to freshen up. On your point as well about not doing a big long run sort of 2 weeks before, I quite like the idea of sort of getting halfway through that sort of 3 to 2 weeks to go, like training normally, and then sort of Thursday, Friday, then being like, okay, like we sort of made it, and now the taper starts, just in that on Sunday you're going to run a bit less. I think it's maybe one where people are still stuck to the sort of 7-day week cycles, where it's like, oh, well, this is 2 weeks to go. But actually,
14 days to go versus 13 days to go. Like, what different? Right, it seems like quite a big. When you talk about weeks, it seems quite different, doesn't it? But it's 1 day here or there is is not going to make a huge difference either way, is it? I guess. But
And
I
then,
think go on.
Go ahead.
You go.
I was going to say, do we maybe want to talk about, because we've said, keep the intensity in, but do we maybe want to talk a bit more about that and how we would?
And I think this is where some of the literature says like either maintain intensity or slightly increase the intensity. And I think you can sort of think about that in two ways, can't you? Like, are you talking about your easy runs, or are you talking about your sessions? And for me, I'd always keep the easy runs the same. Sometimes the pace might get a little bit faster because naturally I'm just a bit more rested. And I think this is where maybe it differs a little bit between if you preparing for a marathon or you preparing for a 5K. For me, I don't really increase the intensity of my sessions. I just reduce the volume a lot. Certainly for the last session of the on the Wednesday, probably before the marathon, I'm going to do, well, I think before Valencia I did 15 times 400 off 30 seconds, whereas previous sessions have been 30 times 400 off 30 seconds rest, or and even then that was a shorter session for me when I was often accumulating an hour plus of intervals on a Tuesday and a Friday. So I guess the intensity was pretty similar. I wasn't trying to really kill these 400s. I was running them in like 69 seconds, 70 seconds, which is what I would typically do if I was going to do 30 times 400 off 30 seconds. Whereas maybe if you're getting ready for a 5K, then you want to put in you want to up the intensity a little bit, but maybe not, because you've also already been doing lots of more intense sessions probably. So I would always be in favor of not risking it and just maintaining the intensity of your sessions, but reducing the volume, because that's the trap people fall into, isn't it? It's going, right, we're going to reduce the volume of the session, but actually we're going to compensate by increasing the intensity, and actually you end up more fatigued than if you're just done your normal session at a more controlled intensity.
Yeah, and it's maybe worth also saying that, like, in research, if it says maintain intensity, like, it's chances are they're using like a 3-zone model, and that's quite broad then on what is like hard training. That's everything from like sort of LT2 sort of work all the way up. So if you're looking at someone's taper and they've maintained the intensity because they've done some work in the sort of severe domain, which would be that LT2 and up, like, in reality, when you're a runner, there's a difference between doing, a marathon week session for me might be like 4 by 5 minutes, maybe, like that, although that feels quite big, but yeah, that sort of vibe, that's completely different to doing, like 5 by a K at like VO2 max pace, but like that might look the same when you're using that 3-zone.
Yeah, when it gets diluted by a reasonably crude research approach, which is also being lumped in with 15 other participants, that nuance gets lost a bit, doesn't it?
Yeah, and I think that's why it's important to remember the sort of overall aim is to reduce training load, and intensity plays a really big part in that.
100%. Yeah, and I always just think, just don't do anything stupid. Just if don't do anything crazily different to what you were doing in the previous 10 weeks, just do a bit less of it. Because I have seen people go, right, at the end of a marathon block, going, right, we're going to do a VO2 max block here to really maximize my VO2 max. Well, you've not been doing that for 10 weeks. Why are you going really completely deviating your training from what you have been doing, and it's probably been working quite well? Just doesn't make sense. Just don't get carried away, and holding your nerve, I think, is a good message for tapering in general. Just hold your nerve, don't get carried away. Just because you've got more energy, don't go too hard. And on your last 2 or 3 sessions before the marathon, just because they're shorter, you don't need to run them any harder. Just enjoy feeling them being a bit easier.
Yeah. I didn't have anything more to add. I think that might be a nice place to end.
Yeah, I think the only other thing I was going to say was we talked about reducing your training, but how much do you reduce it by? Like, and I think I think the research would typically say, you know, between 40 and 60%. But there's definitely, as we've said earlier, there's nuance in that. If you are only running, I say only running, if you're running like, you know, 4 times a week, then maybe you can reduce it by 20%. If you're running 200k a week, then maybe you do need to reduce it by 50%, like 40%. And that also, the research doesn't also, it's looking at it probably more on a week by week basis rather than a day by day basis. Yeah. Because actually the day before a marathon, you're probably going to reduce your training loads to more than, but by more than 40% by more than 60%, sorry, if you're a high volume athlete. You know, if I'm normally doing sometimes up to 30k on an easy day, well, I'm probably only going to do about 6k the day before the marathon. Having said that, I think I did 11k before Valencia, but it was before anyone brings it up, but it was quite slow. And in the context, it's still 11k versus like 30k. That's quite a big still a big reduction, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it's maybe one of the points where actually like that is really person specific and individualized. And yeah, I was going to say like, yeah, the day before a race, I'd maybe be doing like 15-20 minutes tops, but if your daily run is like 30 minutes, then it needs to be a lot less. And maybe that's where when you're thinking about this and planning it out, like you just start, like we were saying, just, you know, lop a few minutes off each run and it sort of ends up taking care of itself. Or you know, even if you want to start from the day before the race and say, okay, like my normal run is 40 minutes, so day before the race it's going to be, I don't know, 12 to 15 sort of thing. And then just like work from there backwards to 14-15 days out. Is also another way to do it.
That's how I go about it. I don't go, right, I'm going to run, you know, my average for the last 10 weeks has been, you know, 160k, for example, and then I'm going to go 70% of that on the first week and 50% of that on the second week. That's not how I do it. I do, like you said, just to go, right, the first week I'm going to knock 10 minutes off each run, the next week I'm going to knock 20 to 30 minutes off each run, and then on the last 2 or 3 days into a marathon I'm going to be more aggressive again and just do, like you said, 30 to 40 minutes of easy running versus getting on for 2 hours of easy running that I'd normally do on an easy day. And don't get obsessed about percentages, because as we said earlier, it is all just averages of a reasonably heterogeneous population with different backgrounds and goals and all that. But I would generally, I think to wrap it up, if we're ready to wrap it up, I think key messages are maintain frequency, maintain intensity, reduce volume. If you're a high volume athlete, you probably need to reduce your volume a bit more than if you're a low volume athlete. And just hold your nerve, don't get carried away, don't go crazy on the intensity just because you're feeling a bit fresher. Don't panic if you're not feeling super good on the Tuesday or the Wednesday. It doesn't matter. It's just keep a normal routine as much as you can, just with gradually reducing the volume.
I think that's hopefully a good take-home message. And hopefully anyone running London or Manchester can implement some of this by the time this is released, or in the future. If anyone's running a marathon probably many months after this is released, then they can apply some of this as well.
So good luck to everybody racing. And if you have taken any pearls of wisdom from this episode, we'd love to hear about it. So send us a message on Instagram, and we will record again soon. So thanks for listening. Any final closing comments, Owain?
No, nothing for me. Like you said, we're I guess probably worth saying we're back to like 2-week releases if you hadn't already guessed. We'll see you in a couple of weeks.
All the best. See ya.